On a humid spring morning in May 2025, one of Tennessee's most chilling murder cases finally came to its somber end. Oscar Franklin Smith, once an unremarkable maintenance worker, later branded as one of the most notorious inmates in the state, was executed at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution. His journey from family man to convicted murderer spanned over 3 decades, shadowed by relentless appeals, public debate, and the unending pain of a family torn apart. But to truly understand how a name like Oscar Franklin Smith became synonymous with brutality, we have to rewind to a time when the story was just beginning, a time before the headlines and before the courtrooms. It started in the fall of 1989 on a quiet street tucked away in a modest Nashville neighborhood, with a series of choices and tragedies that would ripple across generations. It was Sunday, October 1st, 1989. The clock read just past 11:20 p.m., when the stillness of the night was shattered by a desperate phone call to the Metropolitan Nashville Police. The dispatcher picked up the sound of panic. A young boy, his voice barely steady, begging for help. "Please, help," the boy pleaded, his terror unmistakable. In the background, another voice, older, perhaps a brother or even the mother, screamed out in anguish. "Frank, no, God, help me." The phone line went silent after the boy choked out one more critical piece of information. An address. 324 Ludy Street. Within minutes, patrol cars cruised quietly through the Woodbine neighborhood. The officers stopped outside the given address, searching for signs of trouble. There were none. No broken glass, no forced entry, no neighbors in the street. The porch light was off. The curtains were drawn. The silence was heavy, but not suspicious enough to force entry. After knocking on the door and getting no answer, police assumed it was a prank or perhaps a domestic dispute that had quickly resolved itself. They drove away, unaware that the violence inside had already claimed 3 lives. It was the following afternoon, as sunlight filtered through the blinds of 324 Ludy Street, that the truth was finally uncovered. At 3 p.m., a worried neighbor, noticing the house had been eerily quiet all day, called the police. Officers returned, this time entering the home. The scene they discovered inside would become seared into Nashville's history, a tableau of carnage and heartbreak that no amount of training could prepare them for. 3 bodies lay in the small, disheveled house. Judith Smith, known as Judy, and her 2 teenage sons from a previous marriage, Chad and Jason Burnett. Chad was 16. Jason was just 13. The kitchen was a war zone. Furniture was tossed aside, as if a violent struggle had swept through the house. Blood stained the walls, pooled on the linoleum, and splattered across cabinets. The kitchen phone, torn from the wall, lay broken on the floor, a silent witness to a final, frantic call for help. Chad's body was discovered face up, his lifeless eyes staring at the ceiling. The brutality inflicted on him was staggering. Gunshot wounds in the shoulder, chest, and above his left eye, fired at point-blank range. Each injury told a story of a desperate fight for survival. In addition to the bullets, Chad had been stabbed multiple times. Deep, angry wounds in his chest, back, and abdomen. His neck bore a long, savage slash. Defensive cuts and bruises covered his hands. The forensic team later reported that Chad fought hard. He did not go quietly. Judy was found in the front bedroom, lying on her back with her arms splayed, blood spattered on the walls around her. She had been shot in the arm and in the neck. The bullet that tore through her neck shattered her spine, paralyzing her instantly. It was a catastrophic injury, ensuring her death came within moments. Yet the violence didn't stop there. Her neck had also been slashed and stab wounds marred her torso and arms. Whoever had attacked this family was driven by a rage that seemed almost inhuman. Jason, the youngest, was found near the bed, curled up as if trying to protect himself. He hadn't been shot, but the knife wounds to his chest and stomach were devastating. His neck, too, had been slashed. Deep cuts ran across his hands where he had tried in vain to fend off the assault. The medical examiner later revealed that 2 of Jason's stab wounds had severed major veins. He was found with his small hands clutching his abdomen, desperately trying to hold his intestines in. A child's last, hopeless effort to survive. It took him minutes to die, minutes in which he must have suffered alone. The crime scene was methodical and savage in equal measure. There were no obvious signs of forced entry, but the back door was left wide open, swaying slightly in the breeze. Inside, a heavy wooden table had been snapped. Odd on .22 caliber shell casing lay glinting in the den, and bullet holes pocked the walls of the bedroom and living room. A blood-soaked awl, normally used for punching holes in leather, had been left behind. The gun and knife were missing. And then there was the most damning evidence, a bloody palm print on the bedsheet next to Judy's body. The print was incomplete. 2 fingers were missing. Detectives immediately started piecing together what little they had. The missing fingers on the palm print stood out as a glaring clue. It was almost as if the killer had left a signature, and there was only one man in Judy's life who fit that description, her estranged husband, Oscar Franklin Smith, who had lost 2 fingers years earlier in a workplace accident. But who was Oscar Franklin Smith really? Friends called him Frank. Born and raised in Ohio, he was one of 7 children. His father, Oscar Earl, and mother, Florence, raised the family on traditional values, working-class grit, and religious faith. In the 1970s, the Smiths moved south to Tennessee, settling in Robertson County. Frank dropped out of school young, taking jobs wherever he could, construction, janitorial work, odd jobs for neighbors. He was quiet, sometimes brooding, but generally kept out of trouble. He met Judith Lynn Roberts in the early 1980s. She was a waitress at a local Waffle House, a single mother trying to provide for Chad and Jason after a rough divorce. Frank was also separated with 2 kids of his own, Laura and Merle, both living with his parents in Pleasant View. Their courtship was brief. Frank and Judy were married in 1985, blending their families under one roof. The following year, Judy gave birth to twin boys, Chris and Casey. On the surface, it looked like a classic American story. 2 broken families finding hope in each other, starting anew. But the cracks began to show almost immediately. Frank had a temper. He didn't handle stress well. By the late 1980s, arguments between Frank and Judy had become commonplace, loud enough for the neighbors to overhear. The children, once close, were now wary of Frank's unpredictable moods. Judy, too, was growing fearful. She confided in friends and family that she believed Frank might hurt her. Chad and Jason, teenagers trying to protect their mother, also shared those fears. The summer before the murders, things spiraled out of control. During a visitation at Frank's trailer in Pleasant View, Frank snapped. He bit Jason, leaving a bruise, and threatened him with a gun. He forced Judy and the boys out, barking threats. "Don't touch the car, don't take the twins, and don't call the police." Judy was terrified but felt trapped by the custody agreement. She filed for divorce that June, seeking full custody of Chris and Casey. The legal process did little to cool tempers. Frank was angry about losing his family and, more specifically, losing his sons. His behavior became erratic and threatening. In August, when Judy returned to collect her belongings, Frank attacked her, tied her up, sexually assaulted her, and threatened to kill her. She managed to escape, but the police were now fully aware of the escalating danger. Friends of Judy remembered her coming to work with bruises. Co-workers recalled overhearing Frank's threatening phone calls. "I'll shoot you," he said. "I'll stab you. I'll kill those boys." Frank believed Judy treated her sons better than she did his own twins, fueling his resentment and anger. Just weeks before the murders, Frank reportedly warned Judy's father, "I've been playing with her with kid gloves, but now the gloves are coming off." At the same time, Frank began taking out life insurance policies on Judy and both boys. In hindsight, it looked like a motive, a way to profit from their deaths. To the prosecution, it was more than enough. At the trial, the case rested on two pillars: the bloody palm print with the missing fingers and the mountain of threats and prior violence. On July 26, 1990, after a tense trial, a jury convicted Oscar Franklin Smith on 3 counts of capital murder. 2 days later, he was sentenced to death. But if the courtroom drama was over, the legal battle was just beginning. Smith's legal team quickly filed appeals, questioning the forensic evidence, especially the palm print. They argued that the original analysis was flawed and that the print could not be definitively linked to Frank. They brought in outside experts who claimed the evidence was mishandled. But the appeals courts sided with the prosecution, finding the chain of evidence intact and the testimony of witnesses convincing. For nearly 3.5 decades, Smith sat on death row, housed in a small cell at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution. He lived through the daily monotony, early morning head counts, sparse meals, hour-long recreation, and the ever-present clang of steel doors. His lawyers continued to fight on his behalf, arguing that key evidence had been overlooked or improperly tested. They filed motion after motion, requests for DNA testing, claims of ineffective counsel, even appeals to the governor for clemency. Each one was denied. Then, just when it seemed the state would finally carry out his execution in April 2022, a shocking revelation came to light. Tennessee's lethal injection protocol was found to be flawed. The chemicals used for executions had not been tested for endotoxins as required by state law. This oversight triggered a wave of concern, not just for Smith, but for every inmate on Tennessee's death row. The governor called an immediate halt to all executions while the Department of Corrections scrambled to overhaul its procedures. For 2 years, Smith's fate hung in the balance as the state moved to a new protocol, switching from a multi-drug cocktail to a single, high-dose injection of pentobarbital. With the legal hurdles cleared, the execution was rescheduled for May 22, 2025. The final days of Oscar Franklin Smith's life passed in a blur of legal filings, media scrutiny, and a haunting sense of inevitability. He was given the chance to select his last meal, a small gesture of humanity in a process otherwise defined by rigidity. Smith asked for hot dogs, tater tots, apple pie, and vanilla ice cream. According to prison policy, the meal was delivered the evening before, to be finished by midnight. Witnesses later said he ate slowly, lost in thought, occasionally pausing to pray. On the morning of May 22nd, Smith was moved to the death watch cell. The atmosphere was tense, both in the prison and in the community beyond. Protesters gathered outside Riverbend, some demanding justice for Judy and her sons, others calling for the abolition of the death penalty. Inside, Smith's spiritual advisor joined him, offering comfort, reading scripture, and softly singing the hymn, "I'll Fly Away." At 10:32 a.m., Smith was led into the execution chamber and strapped to the gurney. The curtain separating the chamber from the witness room was drawn back. In the final moments, Smith appeared calm. He spoke quietly to his advisor, gripping his hand tightly. Then the warden asked if he wished to make a final statement. Smith's last words echoed the same message he'd carried for years. "I did not kill her." He took a breath, then spoke directly to the governor and the public. "Our justice system is broken. Too many innocent people are being put to death. Somebody needs to tell the governor he has the power to stop this. He needs to get a backbone." He looked at the assembled witnesses, pausing as if to etch the moment in memory. "There are more men waiting to die at Riverbend. I won't be the first, and I won't be the last." At 10:35 a.m., the executioner began the process. The pentobarbital flowed into Smith's veins. He continued to speak for as long as he could, but his voice faded, words slurring. His chest rose and fell more slowly. Witnesses later described the silence as oppressive. Within minutes, Oscar Franklin Smith's life slipped away. At 10:47 a.m., he was pronounced dead. He was 75 years old. Even in death, the questions lingered. For those who lost loved ones in the violence of that October night, the execution was closure, a final act of justice. For others, it was a stark example of the complexities and failings of the American death penalty system. Did the system deliver justice, or had it simply repeated a cycle of loss? The story of Oscar Franklin Smith, from a troubled marriage to a brutal triple homicide and a protracted legal fight, remains one of Tennessee's most haunting chapters.